22-year-old Danny Guyse lived in Pittsburgh, California in 2000. He was a talented young hairdresser and was about to start a new job as a custodian at Pittsburgh Unified School District. Sadly, he would never start his new job. On September 27, 2000, Pittsburgh police received a 911 call. A man had been shot while sitting in his car. The victim was Danny Guyse. He was taken to Sutter Delta Medical Center, where he passed away due to his injuries less than an hour later. The only lead investigators had at the time was that the attacker possibly fled the crime scene in a light-colored Ford Mustang. Investigators have spent the last 20 years looking into numerous persons of interest and suspects. A break in the case finally came in 2019. Investigators identified Paya Tessini as a possible suspect. They have not yet said what led them to him. Investigators secured a search warrant and obtained new evidence in connection to the case. In 2021, investigators believed they had enough evidence to convict Tessini for taking the life of Danny. In February 2021, 45-year-old Tessini was arrested at his home in Alcove, California. He was not just arrested for taking the life of Danny, but also a man by the name of Kenneth Brown Jr. He is currently jailed at a Martinez detention facility on a $10 million bond. Investigators have not yet said what the motive for the crime is. A picture of Tessini has also not yet been made public. There is not really a lot of information about the Kenneth Brown Jr. case. I could only find that he took place on January 4, 2000.
"49-year-old Suzanne Morphew lived in Colorado in 2020 with her husband Barry Morphew and their two daughters, Mallory and Macy. On May 10th, Suzanne went for a bike ride near Maysville, Colorado. When she did not return home, her neighbor reported her as missing to the police. The only thing that was found in the wooded area Suzanne went biking was her bike, but there was no sign of her. Barry posted an emotional plea on Facebook shortly after her disappearance on May 17th, saying he would do whatever it takes to get her back. "Oh, Suzanne, if anyone is out there and can hear this, that has you, please, we'll do whatever it takes to bring you back. We love you, we miss you, your girls need you. No questions asked. However much they want, I will do whatever it takes to get you back. Honey, I love you. I want you back so bad." Over 70 investigators from multiple agencies worked the case. They conducted 400-plus interviews, conducted 135 search warrants, and followed up on over 1,400 tips. Despite the case going cold at one point, investigators now finally have their man. On May 5, 2021, Barry Morphew was arrested in connection to the case. He was also charged with tampering of evidence and attempting to influence a public servant. Barry is being held at the Chaffee County Detention Facility without bond. According to Chaffee County Sheriff John Speasy, they have enough evidence that Barry took his wife's life even though her body has not been found. Officials unfortunately cannot discuss what led them to charge Barry nor give a motive for the crime. John also had this to say: "Today is not the day for celebration, nor does it mark the end of this investigation. Rather, it's a next step in this very difficult yet very important journey as we seek justice for Suzanne and her family." He thanked the FBI, Colorado's Bureau of Investigation, and the Office of 11th Judicial District Attorney Linda Stanley for their roles in breaking the case. Suzanne's sister thanked law enforcement and said that she is very grateful. "Today, justice is beginning for my sister. It's been a journey that no one ever imagines that they'll take. Some of the things we do know is that Barry was at a hotel in Broomfield, Colorado on the day his wife disappeared. He mysteriously left the room reeking of chlorine and covered in wet towels. Barry sold off the home he and Suzanne shared for over $1 million. A few weeks after Suzanne disappeared, he bought a 2-acre plot in Salida, Colorado, then sold it in February 2021. In November of 2020, a search was done at the plot after Suzanne's brother Andrew paid $18,000 for the search. Cadaver dogs were used and they did pick up the scent of human remains. District Attorney Linda Stanley also played an integral part of getting the case to the point it is in now. This is what she had to say. Today is all about Suzanne, and it's about her family, and it's about all the individuals that knew her and loved her and cared about her. So far, these are the only details made available to the public, but for now, it seems the person responsible is behind bars.
Oh, Suzanne, if anyone is out there that can hear this, that has you, please, we'll do whatever it takes to bring you back. We love you, we miss you, your girls need you. No questions asked, however much they want. I will do whatever it takes to get you back. Honey, I love you, and I want you back so bad.
Put it on record, Barry, right now. If people think that you did it, what would you tell them?
Absolutely not. I love my wife. I would never hurt my wife. She is the light of my and my daughter's lives.
Sumter County in South Carolina has one of the highest crime rates in America compared to all communities of all sizes, from the smallest towns to the very largest cities. Sumter County is also where today's case takes place. We will be looking at a Sumter County dose. At 6:20 a.m. on August 9, 1976, a trucker by the name of Martin Durand found the bodies of a young man and a young woman. Martin contacted Charles Graham, who is an employee at a nearby store. Charles then called the police. Both of the victims had been shot in their upper chest area. The male victim was at first believed to be between 18 and 22 years old. The forensic dentist who examined his teeth said the man was older than 27, but looked younger because of his clothing and build. The man was white with an olive complexion. He had brown shoulder-length hair, brown eyes, and very distinctive, bushy eyebrows. He was over 6 feet tall and weighed about 150 pounds. The man had scars on his shoulders and back, had indicated he had played contact sports. He was wearing faded Levi brand jeans and a red t-shirt. He had on a yellow-gold Bulova Accutron wristwatch. He also had a 14-carat gold ring with a grey sapphire stone. The initials JPF were engraved inside the ring. It made investigators believe his name started with the letter J. The ring and the watch were expensive, and dental work on his teeth were elaborate. This all suggested that he had come from an affluent family. The female victim seemed to be younger than the man. She was initially believed to be between 18 and 20 years old. She was 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighed 100 pounds, and had a slim build and an olive complexion just like the male victim. Some people then believed that the two victims were possibly siblings. She had brown shoulder-length hair and bluish-grey eyes. On the left side of her face were two distinctive moles close to her mouth. These rings were worn by her. The rings appeared to be handmade Native American or Mexican costume jewelry. The male victim was referred to as Jock Doe, and a female victim was referred to as Jane Doe. Jock Doe was named that because someone told investigators he met the two victims a few months before they were found, and that the male victim said his name was Jock. A year after the two victims were found, in 1977, a man was arrested in Latta, South Carolina for driving while intoxicated. In his car, investigators found a revolver. It was the same kind as the one used on a Sumter County dose. After some more investigating, it was proven that exact revolver was used in a Sumter County dose case. The man who owned it was never arrested because of insufficient evidence against him. Investigators also traveled to Brunswick, Georgia. There they met with her husband and wife, who believed they were the parents of the Jane Doe. Their daughter was missing. However, after investigators showed them pictures of the Jane Doe, they realized it was not their daughter. Dental comparisons confirmed it was not her. People speculated had Henry Lee Lucas committed the crime. He himself told investigators that he had been in South Carolina the day the victims passed away. Henry Lee Lucas, however, is known for making false confessions. No evidence has ever been found that linked him to the crime. The two victims' bodies were held at a local funeral home, hoping someone could identify them. People from all over the US and even Canada called to inquire about them. This included several parents of young runaways. No one was able to identify the bodies. On August 14, 1977, they were buried in a cemetery in Oswego, South Carolina. Hundreds of people attended the service. Law enforcement was able to raise a few $100s to the funeral home. Their headstones read, "Male unknown and female unknown." The Sumter County Doe's case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries Season 7, Episode 14 in 1995. In 2007, their bodies were exhumed to obtain DNA information. It was then realized that the victims were not genetically related. In July 2019, the DNA Doe Project was asked to help identify the couple. Over $2,000 was donated to fund the extraction of usable DNA profiles from bone marrow for genetic genealogy research. In October 2020, family trees of the victims were created. Then on January 21st, 2021, a press conference was held to announce the identities of the two victims. They were identified as Pamela Buckley and James Freund. Pamela was born on December 16, 1951, in Redwood County, Minnesota. She was last seen in December 1975 in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Pamela was 24 years old when she passed away. James Paul Freund was born on September 16, 1946, in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. He grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. After he graduated from J.P. McCaskey High School, he got married in 1965. He and his wife had a daughter together. Thereafter, he joined the US Army. Also in 1965, he was dispatched to an army base in Germany. The next year, James's father passed away. His father-in-law had worked at a Bulova watch company. It is believed he gave James the watch as a present with the initials JPF engraved. James returned to his family in the United States. His marriage broke down and James disappeared on Christmas Day, 1975. He was just 29 years old when he passed away. Sadly, his mother would never find out what happened to her son, as she passed away in 2004 in Mason, Ohio, at the age of 77. Investigators believe James and Pamela became acquainted as they hitchhiked. It is not known who took their lives. Sheriff Anthony Dennis said, "It is great to be able to bring the family some closure after starting this investigation so many years ago. We also plan to reopen the investigation and follow up with a person of interest." On July 5th, 1966, a young man and woman checked into a motel in Pecos, Texas. The two checked in using the name Mr. and Mrs. Russell Bethune. A few hours after checking in, the woman went swimming in a pool while the man slept in their room. Just after that, screams could be heard coming from the swimming pool area. A maid then found a woman's body in a swimming pool of the motel. As the woman was being taken away in an ambulance, her companion checked out of the motel and was never seen again. An autopsy was done and it was found that she passed away due to drowning, so no foul play was suspected, and it is believed the man left out of fear. No Mr. and Mrs. Bethune matching their description was found. It is not known why they used false names. Investigators tried to identify the man and the woman to no avail. She was called the Pecos Jane Doe. She was estimated to be between 17 and 20 years old. No one had matched her description was reported missing in the area. The citizens of Pecos helped raise money so the woman could be buried and have a service. She was laid to rest in a Fairview cemetery. Her gravestone simply read, "Unknown girl drowned, July 5th, 1966. Every year, investigators would take flowers to her resting place, but they were unable to solve the case, and it went cold. In 2019, the case was reopened, and her body was exhumed so her DNA could be collected. Recently, the Pecos Police Department worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and genealogy technology companies. A composite sketch was then made, hoping that someone would come forward that knew her, but no one did. With the help of DNA, however, it was then discovered that the Pecos Gendo is 17-year-old Jolene Hemi. Police Chief Lisa Tarango had this to say about how DNA helped. It absolutely played a huge role, at least in the identity of who she is. I think if more people in this type of situation with lost family members or unidentified persons get involved in cases like this and cooperate and submit DNA, I think there would be a huge resolution of missing and unidentified people. Investigators still see it as an open and active investigation, and they want anyone with more information to come forward. 17-year-old Jolene was one of 15 children and lived in Salina, Kansas. For her family, it is a bittersweet moment, as they always had some hope as she was still alive, even if it had been over 50 years that I last saw her. In February 1982, an older man and young woman walked into a truck stop in Ash Fork, Arizona. The two of them just wanted some aspirin, as the young woman had some toothache. On February 14, about 2 weeks later, investigators entered the truck stop. They showed pictures of clothing that had been found on the body of a teenage girl. One of the workers, Patty Wilkins, realized that a young woman who entered the truck stop about 2 weeks earlier with the older man had been wearing the same clothes. The young woman had been found under a cedar tree off Interstate 40. An autopsy revealed that she most likely passed away due to strangulation or asphyxiation. Patty Wilkins felt extremely guilty after realizing she knew the girl. It was determined that a young woman's life was taken just a few hours after leaving the truck stop. Wilkins remembered that she asked the young woman at one point if she was okay leaving with the older man, and she said yes. A composite was made of both the girl and the older man, who was now a prominent suspect. I really don't know what to say about a composite sketch of the man. No one came forward with any more information, and the two of them went unidentified. The young woman was called Valentine Sally, as she was found on Valentine's Day. After investigators exhausted all possible leads and could still not identify them, the case went cold. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children decided to try and help identify Valentine Sally. They obtained a DNA sample belonging to her. Recently, with advances in DNA technology, they made use of genetic genealogy to identify her. They used multiple public DNA databases to try and find relatives of Valentine Sally. In 2021, investigators were finally able to confirm her to be Carolyn Celeste Eaton. 17-year-old Carolyn lived in St. Louis, Missouri. On Christmas Day, 1981, she ran away after a fight with one of her 6 siblings. Investigators are still trying to find out who took her life, but hope that Carolyn's family can have a sense of closure, knowing what happened to their loved one. On August 15, 1978, a logging crew came across human remains in Jackson County, Wisconsin. It could be determined that the remains belonged to a male, but not much else was known. Investigators had no idea who the man was, how he got there, or how he lost his life. A composite sketch was made, hoping that someone could identify him, but no one did, and the case soon went cold. In 2014, a DNA sample from the man was entered into a national database for missing and unidentified persons, but no matches could be made. It was only recently that a DNA Doe project got involved, that the case could move forward. In April of 2021, Jackson County Sheriff Dwayne Waldera announced that the remains were that of Dennis Regan McConn. He was a 29-year-old man who went missing from Kenosha, Wisconsin. He was born in DeKalb, Illinois, where he attended DeKalb High School. Dwayne Waldera hopes that identification would lead them to finding out what exactly happened to Dennis Regan McConn. 50-year-old Marie Heiser lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1977. She had a husband named William and 2 children. Marie was a homemaker and a part-time employee at a former Ashbourne Country Club in Cheltenham, Pennsylvania. Her husband William was a member of the Philadelphia Police Department's Highway Patrol from the 1950s until the 1960s, when he got a serious injury. One day in 1977, Marie's son William Jr. came home from boarding school to find that his mom was gone. William Sr. then told his 2 children that their mom had walked out on them. William Jr. found it strange that Marie's belongings were still in their home, but did not ask many questions as he was very young. In June of 1977, a teenager who was biking home in a wooded area in Townsend, Delaware, discovered human remains. Townsend is about 65 miles south of where Mary lived in Philadelphia. The remains could not be identified. The case went cold as fingerprints and dental records failed to turn up any matches. In 2008, investigators extracted a DNA profile from the remains. It was entered into a national DNA database, but no matches could be made. In 2017, investigators sent the sample to a Virginia company called Parabon Nanolabs. A forensic artist working for them used the DNA sample to create a sketch of the victim. Using genetic genealogy, Parabon Nanolabs were also able to create a family tree of the victim. In 2019, a police officer in Montgomery County, Maryland, Steven Smagoreski, took over the research and worked tirelessly to develop new leads on the identity of the remains. In January of 2021, investigators were finally able to confirm that the remains belonged to Marie Heiser. Investigators called William Jr. to tell him that they found his mom's remains. This is what he had to say. "It was a shock to us. You are never expecting a phone call like that. You think to yourself, well, as horrible as the story is, there is some closure. Before we wondered where our mom was. Now we are wondering what happened to her. So one door closes, another opens." William Jr. does not believe that his father had anything to do with his mother's disappearance. He would be the last person that would ever hurt anybody. He was a saint, took care of his family, never raised his voice or hands or argued or anything. William Sr. worked as a truck driver after he could not be a police officer anymore. He moved to Daytona Beach, Florida in the late 1970s. He passed away in 2006. Michael Eckert of the Newcastle County Police Department in Delaware said William Sr.'s explanation that Mary had left the family was one of the many questions they were investigating. 37-year-old Erika Lloyd lived in Walnut Ridge, California. 2020 was a difficult year for her. She had lost her job due to the pandemic. Erika was struggling with the stress of losing her job and trying to homeschool her son. In June of 2020, Erika decided to get away for a bit by taking a trip to Joshua Tree National Park. She left her home on June 14. Erika stayed in contact with her family, but then abruptly, all contact stopped on June 16. Erika would never be seen or heard from again. That same day, a California Highway Patrol found Erika's black Honda sedan abandoned on Highway 62. This is about 20 miles from Joshua Tree National Park. Investigators noted that the front and back windshields of the car were broken. The radio was also shattered and the airbag had been deployed. Erika's items were still inside of the vehicle, but Erika herself was nowhere to be found. It seemed to investigators that the damage to the car was consistent with an accident, and it did not seem like anyone broke into the car. They were unable to find any evidence that a collision happened anywhere in the area, however. Investigators did not believe that Erika camped in any of the nearby campgrounds, as her items were still inside of her car. No evidence that any campers had been in the area could be found. Erika's family members worried that she may have become disoriented after the possible car accident. Investigators tried to find any signs of Erika in the surrounding areas, and they enlisted the help of a man named Doug Billings. Billings is an expert when it comes to the area's caves and mines. In 2014, he assisted when Erin Corwin disappeared from Joshua Tree National Park. Her body would later be found in an abandoned mine. In January of 2021, hikers in Wonder Valley found human remains near Danby Road and Amboy Road. It is just a few miles from where Erika's car had been found. Investigators were able to confirm that the remains have been identified as that of Erika Lloyd. What exactly happened to her is still unknown, but the investigation is still ongoing. Erika's brother, Colin Lloyd, had this to say on a Bring Erika Home Facebook page, after hearing that the remains were identified as that of Erika. It is with a heavy heart to announce that these remains have been identified by San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department as my sister Erika. There is no easy way for me to tell you all this, and there's no easy way for any of us to receive it. My wish is that we can all lean in a little closer, hold each other up, and remind each other more often that we are here for one another, with open arms and endless love. It is what she would have wanted. It is the spirit of who she was. It is frustrating that these two cases are not fully solved, but there is reason to be grateful that the Lloyd family and the Heiser family can now at least have some sense of closure. 22-year-old Katelyn Kelley lived in Shawano County, Wisconsin in 2020. Shawano is home to the Menominee tribe, which is a nation of Native Americans. She also had a baby son. On June 18, 2020, Katelyn was reported missing from the reservation by her family. Katelyn's mom, Michelle, said that her daughter was last seen near Silver Canoe Road, walking towards Kashena, Wisconsin, on the night of June 16. A black SUV was seen parked outside of her home in Shawano a little after 2 a.m. on June 17. Tribal police and other police departments conducted extensive searches for Katelyn in the area where she had last been seen in the days following her disappearance. Family members posted flyers around Wisconsin and pleaded with the public for help in finding Katelyn. On July 22, 2020, Menominee Nation chairperson Joan Delabrew announced a $5,000 reward for any information leading to Katelyn being found. Despite the investigators and the family's efforts, the case would go cold for a while. Then in March 2021, Menominee Tribal Police made an announcement regarding Katelyn's disappearance. They said that human remains were discovered on the reservation on March 17th. On March 22nd, after an autopsy was done, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to Katelyn Kelley. Investigators have not yet announced the manner in which Katelyn passed away or where her remains on a reservation was located. 22-year-old Tyesha Bell lived in Chicago, Illinois with her sister and her 2 daughters. On the evening of May 10, 2003, Tyesha left her home moments after receiving a mysterious call. She was never seen again. Investigators believe that she intended to go back home, as she left her 2 daughters behind with the television on, and had also left her handbag and candles lit in her room. Foul play was suspected. Investigators tried to find Tyesha and also hoped that someone could come forward with more information. Following her disappearance, investigators interviewed an unidentified person of interest in the case. But after searching the person's home and car, the lead fizzled out. Tyesha's mom, Lorna, said, "Until I get a knock on my door and police tell me they have found my daughter's remains, I will continue to think of her as alive." 18 years later, in 2021, she got that knock on the door. In December 2020, Tyesha's remains, clothes, and personal items were found in a wooded area of Kane County, Illinois. In 2021, using dental records and DNA, investigators were able to identify the remains as belonging to Tyesha Bell. It remains unclear how she passed away, but investigators did say that someone took her life. Tyesha's case is considered an open investigation, and investigators are asking for the public's help in finding justice for the beloved mother and daughter. On September 9, 1985, a bear hunter found human bones near Crystal Creek, Montana. It was determined that the bones belonged to a woman. It was believed that she was most likely Asian and of Japanese ethnicity, yet she may have had Caucasian heritage. She had dental work unique to Asia, which was extensive and of good quality. The woman also had thin, wavy, and treated black to light brown hair. Teeth on the right side of her mouth indicated that she was a smoker. She had prominent cheekbones and was most likely right-handed. Investigators tried hard to identify the woman, but was unable to, and she was given the name Christy Crystal Creek. The Missoula Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit partnered with Ofrim, a private lab that conducts advanced DNA analysis. Investigators used DNA profiles from commercial sites like JetMatch and Family Tree DNA to crowdsource genetic and ancestry data. After weeks of genealogy research, investigators identified relatives of the victim. Finally, in May of 2021, they identified the victim as Janet Lee Lucas. Janet was born in October 1960. She grew up in California before moving to Spokane, Washington with her parents and her 7 siblings. Janet disappeared at the age of 23, leaving behind her 5-year-old son. She was last seen in Sandpoint, Idaho. No records show that Janet lived or spent any time in Montana before her body was found there. Missoula Detective Captain Dave Conway said, "We cannot rest on our success of having identified Janet. We must now seek justice for Janet." The sheriff's office released a photo of Janet, taken shortly before she passed away, in hopes someone may recognize her and come forward with more information. Janet's family had this to say in a statement: "After decades of missing Janet, our family is heartbroken to learn that she was tragically taken, unidentified, and spent a large amount of years alone. However, she never spent one moment without being loved. Janet had a contagious smile, warm personality, and wore her heart on her sleeve. Janet had been missed dearly, searched for, but most importantly, never forgotten. Janet was loved by everyone. Not only was she a mother, she was a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a friend, and now a grandmother to 4 beautiful children. We are grateful to finally be able to bring her home to us, as well as bring Janet the peace and rest she so deserves." Investigators believe that Wayne Nance might be responsible for taking her life. He has been linked to many similar crimes in the area, but he was never found guilty as he passed away in 1986. On February 25, 1957, a boy's body was found wrapped in a blanket in a box. The discovery was made in the woods in Fox Chase, Philadelphia. An autopsy revealed that the boy passed away due to blunt force trauma. It was estimated that he was between 4 and 6 years old. He was described as a Caucasian boy that stood at 40 inches tall. He had surgical scars on his ankle and groin. There was also an L-shaped scar under his chin. It appeared as if he had recently had a haircut, as there were some clumps of hair in the box. A young man made a discovery of the boy when he was checking his traps. He feared that the police would confiscate his traps, so he did not tell anyone what he found. A few days later, another young man saw a rabbit running into the woods. He followed it and then came across the body of the boy. He did not want to contact the police, as he felt that he would be a suspect in the case. He did contact them, however, a day after he made the discovery. Investigators took fingerprints from the boy in the box. They believed that they would be able to identify him quickly, but that was not the case. They found no matches for the fingerprints, and no one came forward with any useful information. Close to the crime scene, a man's blue cap was found, as well as a child's scarf and a man's white handkerchief. All of his clues would lead nowhere. The case soon became known as the boy in the box and America's unknown child. It attracted a lot of media attention. Investigators also looked at the box for any clues. They discovered that it once contained a bassinet sold by J.C. Penney. They were unable to find the owner of the box. The same could be said for the blanket that the boy was found in. As you can imagine, there are a lot of theories regarding this case. We'll only be discussing a few. A man by the name of Remington Bristow spent thousands of hours investigating this case. He found a foster home that was located approximately 1.5 miles from the site of the body. Remington attended an estate sale at a foster home. There he found a bassinet similar to the one made by J.C. Penney. He also found blankets on a clothesline that were similar to the one in which the boy's body had been wrapped in. Remington believed that the boy belonged to the stepdaughter of the man who owned the foster home. Investigators did question the foster family, but were not able to find definite links between them and the boy in the box. In 2002, a woman who we only know as Martha or M came forward and told investigators an incredible story. She said that her mother purchased the boy from his biological parents in the summer of 1954. The boy was subjected to extreme physical abuse for 2.5 years. One evening at dinner, the boy vomited up his meal of baked beans and was given a severe beating. His head was slammed against the floor. The boy was then given a bath, and during which he passed away. Martha's mother then cut the boy's long hair to conceal his identity. The two women then dumped his body in a Fox Chase area. The details that was given matched information known only to investigators. There was baked beans in the boy's stomach, and his fingers were water wrinkled. Investigators were unable to verify her story. The boy in the box was buried at Ivy Hill Cemetery in Cedar Brook, Philadelphia. His headstone has the words "America's Unknown Child" on it. People often decorate it with flowers and stuffed animals. The case has been featured on a lot of different shows, such as America's Most Wanted, Cold Case, CSI Crime Scene Investigation, Law & Order Special Victims Unit. The Ghoul Boys also featured it on Season 2 of BuzzFeed Unsolved in 2017. All hail the Watcher. In 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a forensic facial reconstruction of the boy. In 2019, the boy's remains were exhumed. They were able to retrieve DNA that was sent to a lab in Europe. In 2021, it allowed them to create a DNA profile. A lot of DNA companies are now working to find family members of the boy using genetic genealogy so they can identify him. On May 25, 1981, the body of a woman was found at a low river crossing in Pulaski County, Missouri. An autopsy revealed that the woman had been strangled. It was determined that she was Caucasian and had dark hair. It was estimated that she was anywhere from 25 to 40 years old. She was named the Pulaski County Jane Doe and were buried at the Waynesville Cemetery. Investigators followed a lot of leads, but it all led nowhere and the case would go cold for many years. In 2015, her remains were exhumed in hopes of getting DNA evidence from her body. In April 2019, the DNA Doe Project got involved. They then tried to find relatives of the victim using her DNA. In December 2019, they reached a man in Alexandria, Virginia, who they believed was the brother of the victim. He said that he did have a sister that a family lost contact with in the early 1980s. He gave them his DNA sample. The DNA analysis of the two samples found that a man and the victim were 19.4 million times more likely to be biological siblings than not being related. This now meant that Pulaski County Jane Doe was finally identified as Karen K. Knippers on the 25th of May 2021. She was identified exactly 40 years after her body was found to the day. An investigation to find a person who took Karen's life is still ongoing. Anyone with information is asked to call Pulaski County Sheriff's Detective DJ Reno at this number. It is known that Karen was 32 years old when her life was taken, and that she was reported missing from St. Louis, Missouri. On March 12 of 1992, the remains of a male was discovered in Sand Canyon in Nevada after police officers received an anonymous tip. The area the remains were found in is located in Nevada's high desert, about 100 miles away from Reno. An autopsy was done and it was believed that a man's life was taken in the summer or spring of 1991. It was not possible to identify him, so he was named Sand Canyon John Doe. Clay reconstructions were made to give people nightmares, in hopes that someone would recognize him, but no one did. He had auburn hair, blue eyes, at least one root canal, and 8 of his teeth were missing. In the vicinity of where the remains were discovered, a dark-colored hat with the words Heavenly Lake Tahoe was found. Also blue jeans, black underwear, black running shoes, a damaged dog collar, and a blanket. The damaged dog collar is interesting because a resident of the area that lives close to where the remains were found noticed a dog that would occasionally wander close to his house. It is possible that a dog belonged to the Sand Canyon John Doe. Lieutenant Jerry Pattinson of the Major Crimes Division of the Lyon County Sheriff's Office recently took another look at the case. He was listening to a crime podcast about advances in technology, combining DNA science with genealogy data. In 2020, he contacted Parabon Nanolabs. Parabon was able to find relatives of the Sand Canyon John Doe. A DNA sample was taken from a man who investigators believed was the brother of the victim. In May of 2021, it was announced that Sand Canyon John Doe is Vincent Marion Trapp. He was born in Sacramento, California. He served in the US Army in the late 1960s. Vincent was 43 years old when his life was taken. Investigators found that he lived in Yerington, Nevada in the spring of 1991. They also announced that they do have persons of interest, but cannot disclose any names. An image of Vincent was made public by investigators, hoping that someone has some useful information. On May 8, 1992, the body of a male was found by irrigation workers in Hidalgo County, Texas. The autopsy revealed that he passed away a week before he was found and that he had been stabbed. Investigators were unable to identify the man, and he was called John Doe. He was laid to rest in Hillcrest Cemetery in Edinburgh, Texas. A composite sketch was made of the man, hoping someone would recognize him, but no one did, and the case went cold. Hermelinda Chavez works for the Hidalgo County Major Crimes Unit, and she recently took another look at the case. They used the DNA sample they had of the John Doe and submitted it to the National Missing and Unidentified Person System to look for any matches. There they found a woman who they believed was the mother of the John Doe. The woman said that she had a son who went missing in 1992. After a DNA test, it was confirmed that her son Benjamin was indeed the John Doe. 19-year-old Benjamin Benetti lived in Zion, Illinois. He met a 17-year-old girl from McConn, Texas, in Illinois when her parents worked there. In March of 1992, he went to McConn and got engaged to the girl. A week after Benjamin's body was found, his mom received a call from a mechanic in a Rio Grande Valley. The mechanic said that Benjamin left his car in the shop to get fixed, but never picked it up. Benjamin's mother then reported him missing to a few local police departments. Sadly, the connection between a missing Benjamin and a John Doe that was found was not made until now. Investigators also talked to Benjamin's fiancée. She said that he received a phone call and that he told her he needed to go to Mexico and that she never saw him again. She never reported him missing because her family made fun of her, saying Benjamin left and used her. Benjamin's mom saved all the documents and letters that she sent to all local law enforcement agencies in hopes to find her son. She never gave up. She was determined to find him. It was because she submitted her DNA to the National Missing and Unidentified Person System that her son could be identified. Benjamin's remains were given to her so that she can give him a proper funeral. He was buried in Maple Park Cemetery. On the headstone, he is described as kind and caring, a fine young man who his family will always love and never forget. If you have any information regarding this case that might be useful, you are asked to call this number. On December 21st, 1987, the body of a female was discovered on the side of a road near Lincolnville in Marion County, Kansas. The autopsy estimated that she passed away somewhere between June and August 1987. She was described as Caucasian, roughly 5 feet and 7 inches tall, and weighed approximately 120 pounds. The woman had light brown hair and a tattoo of a cross on her left forearm. A composite sketch was made showing what she might have looked like. She was named the Marion County Jane Doe. In April 2019, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation worked alongside the DNA Doe project to help solve the case. They used DNA belonging to the victim to try and find her relatives using public DNA databases. In October of the same year, investigators found 2 people who they believed was the parents of the victim. Then in December 2019, after some more DNA testing, it was announced by the Kansas Bureau of Investigation that the identity of Marion County Jane Doe is Michelle Yvonne Carnell Burton. 22-year-old Michelle lived in Wichita, Kansas. She left her family's home in Cherryvale in 1986, and her family lost touch with her. Her whereabouts after she left home is still not known yet. Investigators are now focusing on who took Michelle's life. They are looking for information from the public. On April 18, 1980, a woman's body was found on the shore of the North Canadian River in eastern Oklahoma County. Whoever took her life dropped quicklime over her body in an attempt to quicken the decomposition process. It had the opposite effect and preserved her body. An autopsy showed that the woman had been shot. She had a professionally done heart-shaped tattoo. She also had blonde to light brown hair extending to her shoulders. The investigators also noted that she had extensive dental work done and hoped this would help to identify her later. It would be tough to identify her because the woman had no form of identification on her. She soon became known as the Lime Lady. Captain Bob Green started working on the case. He said that investigators believed that the Lime Lady was between 18 and 25 years old. He also said that his team exhausted all resources to identify the woman, but to no avail. The case unfortunately went cold. Recently, however, Bob Green decided to renew their search for answers. He contacted the DNA Doe Project in September of 2018. Bob Green collected the Lime Lady's DNA samples from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. He then sent it in to the DNA Doe Project. During the time they waited for a profile to be created with the DNA samples, his team learned that the Lime Lady at one point lived in Las Vegas, Nevada, and served in the army. They then used a local medical examiner to secure military documents such as dental records. Thanks to the documentation, they could identify the Lime Lady as 21-year-old Tamara Lee Tigard in January 2020. It is a good thing they had the dental records because Tamara had no living relatives. She was born on April 18, 1959 in California. This meant that her body was found on a day she turned 21. She later moved to Las Vegas, Nevada. Tamara was a veteran of the United States Army. Her parents passed away in the 2000s and her sister in 2010. This sadly meant that they never found out what happened to their loved one. In March 1980, a month before her body would be found, Tamara went for a walk near her home in Las Vegas and never returned home. She was reported missing. It was never followed up on though, since a woman in Ohio was using her identity. The woman was never named a suspect, and who she is still unknown. It is good that Tamara has her name back. Investigators are still trying to find out who took her life. Captain Bob Green had this to say: "I always just wanted to bring dignity to the victim in this case. All of these years she has been gone without a trace, with none of her family or acquaintances knowing what happened to her." Vanessa Smallwood was a 46-year-old woman from Burlington County, New Jersey. Vanessa worked for a contractor at Philadelphia International Airport, but she was out on disability. She was married and had children. Vanessa also struggled with mental health issues. On January 27, 2014, Vanessa and her husband went to a dry cleaning business on Haddonfield Road in Cherry Hill. Her husband went into the dry cleaners while she waited inside their car. The car is a 2005 Chrysler minivan. When her husband came outside, there was no sign of his wife or the car. Later that day, there was a ping from Vanessa's cell phone on Broad Street in Clayton, Gloucester. Investigators do not suspect any foul play and believed that she ran away. There was no activity on her credit or debit cards. In 2020, divers with Walker Diving Underwater Construction were doing an inspection in the Salem River to check for obstructions in the water that would interfere with shipping when they discovered a vehicle. The vehicle was a Chrysler. Inside the car, divers found a female body. DNA testing was done and it was confirmed that the body belonged to Vanessa Smallwood. It is not known how Vanessa ended up in the water. Her family can now at least give her a proper funeral. Savannah Hoskins lived in Ogden, Utah in 1985. She had 5 children and was married to Joe Hoskins. Joe was a violent man and their marriage was not a happy one. They argued a lot and Savannah tried to run away a few times. In July of 1985, Savannah was reported missing to the Ogden Police Department. A couple days later, a group of residents saw 2 legs floating in a nearby river. The legs appeared white at first, but investigators noted that it did indeed belong to an African American woman. It was believed that the legs belonged to Savannah, but there was no way of knowing, because DNA technology was not that advanced in 1985. No other body parts were found. Since they were not sure if it was Savannah's legs, they could not arrest anyone. In the years that the case was called, Joe Hoskins passed away and would never be questioned. In 2020, Savannah's children and grandchildren asked investigators to look into the case once more, so they did. Investigators still had a toenail from the legs that were found back in 1985 and sent it in for DNA testing. It was then confirmed that the legs indeed belonged to Savannah. The Ogden Police Department still believes that Joe is responsible. In a statement it was made public that Joe actually made incriminating statements, and that with other witness statements plus the DNA match, all leads point to Joe Hoskins. Esther Lucille Westenbarger lived in Fostoria, Ohio for most of her life. She attended Fostoria High School and worked for an automobile manufacturer for nearly 20 years. In 2009, Esther accepted a buyout from her employer and decided to move to Kokomo, Indiana, to be closer to her mom and siblings. Initially, she went to live with her mom, but after an argument, 51-year-old Esther used the money she got from the buyout to get her own place. One evening, she went out with new friends of hers. She parked her Cadillac outside of a bar. She was last seen a few hours later, presumably on her way to her car. When Esther missed the party that she planned for her mom, the family got worried and she was reported missing in November 2009. The new friends of hers were all questioned, but no new information came to light and the case went cold. Then on June 17, 2020, Howard County 911 Dispatch Center received a call regarding a car that was found in a pond. A dive team was then used to retrieve the car. They noticed it was a Cadillac and that the remains of a female was inside. DNA testing was done and was confirmed that it was indeed Esther Westenbarger. It is believed that she had too much to drink and accidentally drove into the pond, but it is not known yet what exactly happened to her.